Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this session. My name is Sam, and joining me on the line today is Dr. Ralph Hynum, the Group CEO of Volpara Health Technologies, as well as Katherine Singson, the newly appointed CEO of Volpara's US subsidiary, Volpara Solutions. So in today's session, we're going to be learning more about Katherine's background and introducing Katherine, as well as exploring Volpara's plans to accelerate a switch to digital marketing from conventional marketing. So just a few things before we begin. This session will involve a live Q&A. So if you do want to ask a question, you can type it into the Q&A box on Zoom. We will be focusing mainly on questions relating to Katherine and the news announced this week. So this will be a 30-minute session and a recording will be made available afterwards. So let's begin the Q&A, and I'll start with you, Ralph. So this week's news sounds incredibly exciting for Volpara. Are you able to give us some background on this news, given it comes on off the back of some solid Q1 results?
Yes, Sam. So we did indeed have very solid Q1 results, which we did in the 4C some time ago, despite coronavirus. Yeah, we got a number of deals across the line. We had very, very low churn, and we had excellent cash receipts. In fact, we actually had a record quarter for cash receipts. But in the background, we've been looking and planning about going to digital much more compared to doing conventional trade shows and then on-site visits. We've been looking at that for various reasons, but especially to cut customer acquisition costs. And then the key now is to try and switch to digital, cut down those costs while still achieving good growth and so on. COVID obviously has come along, and that's really made us accelerate those plans. We are then in a great position of strength to do this, given we have 27% of the market, plus many luminary sites like UCSF, MSK, MD Anderson, and so on. That puts us in a great place to do digital, to really target the install base, but also we want to get to a place where consumers start to demand our product. And we now have enough sites across the US that they can start to search for and find our sites. And we're also taking the viewpoint, why shouldn't more women get access to state-of-the-art breast cancer screening? And those are Volpara sites. Now, I've known Katherine for 7 years. We met via Roger Allen, who is a leading Australian entrepreneur in Sydney. He introduced me to Katherine while she was working for Microsoft in Sydney. And recently we've been bringing her on as a consultant to talk to us around digital strategy. It's very clear over that 10 weeks that she's ideas and great vision that can take us from that 27% much higher. She's been inspirational to me and the whole team, and just producing ideas which I'm convinced are not just ideas, not just good marketing ideas, but ideas which will actually work out in the market. So now we're spending a lot of time working out how to pivot slightly and in how we operate and how we focus. Thus, I'm very happy to announce and introduce Katherine today, CEO of Volpara Solutions Inc., our US subsidiary. She's having a massive impact, already changed our mission to prevent advanced stage breast cancer, which she'll talk more about. And but let me reiterate, we do have a strong sales pipeline. We're going to keep on doing the B2B work whilst gradually pivoting this marketing over to Katherine's way of thinking.
Great, thanks, Ralph. And that sounds like a very positive move. So Katherine, we'll turn to you now. Are you able to introduce yourself and tell us about your background?
Certainly. Thanks for that, Ralph. So I have a more than 30-year career, and I'm going to age myself really quickly here, but I started my career in Silicon Valley in the 80s. And ironically, it was actually an AI startup called Verity. And I worked there for 5 years. And back in the day, 5 years was what you did. You didn't jump around quite so much. And it was a fascinating experience. I learned so much. And near the end of that period, I was able to work with Philippe Courteau, who was, sort of a quite well-known serial entrepreneur. He's now the CEO of Qualys. And so from there, I was headhunted to Next. Next had, you might remember Next, it was Steve Jobs' second company after Apple, after he did his India stint. And the hardware had failed, and they wanted to take the software, the Next OS, out of the hardware and sell it into vertical markets. And so that really began the start of my intense B2B experience. And we grew the company from 0 to 50 million over a few years. And within a few months, Steve had tapped me to work directly for him. And so thus began probably one of the most intense and interesting parts of my career. We, infamously sold next to Apple for less than $500 million. If you think about that, that's extraordinary. And so during that time, and this is something that people forget because, people think of Steve now, they think of Steve with iPhones and iPods, but back then Apple was really not doing well. And so when we were doing the deal, Steve actually took me aside and said, and this is amazing, he said, "Katherine, Apple is in a death spiral. I want you to come with me to Pixar and make movies." And, at the time he was just about to sign a 5-picture deal with the Walt Disney Company. It was going off of the success of Toy Story. And so really, how do you say no to Steve Jobs asking you to come to Pixar and start his marketing and publicity department? And so, it was such a great privilege. I obviously went over to the studio at that point and got to learn all about a very different business. And as you can imagine, it's a 4-year cycle to create that sort of blockbuster film. And my job was quite daunting at the time. I had to create the whole marketing pipeline to make sure that that these masterpieces actually got seen by people. And that was all the ancillary marketing. So, all of the tie-ins with the toy companies and the restaurants, etc. And so during that time, as you well know, he got pulled back to Apple, and he asked me to please stay at Pixar, and so he could concentrate on saving Apple, were his exact words. And I was lucky. I got to work on lots of different projects during that time because he shared projects with me. For example, when I was working at Next, he would often try things out on me for Pixar. And then, of course, when I was at Pixar, he would share things that he was working on at Apple. And so I worked for him for 6 years, and that was a lot. It was intense, and I think maybe it was the second Time cover, Time magazine cover that he got, and those were really important to him. And I decided at that point it was good to leave. It was my time. We'd done well, and we were able to stay on very good terms because I didn't leave to go to another studio or another technology company. I went to Italy, and I decided to give myself a year off, and I decided to study Italian, which had always been a dream of mine. And so to be able to take that time was a great luxury. But one thing led to another. I did a lot of consulting during that time. The .com boom was happening as well as the .com bust. And so I did a lot of fascinating things during that time, including, doing a lot of writing and personal development. And eventually I landed in Australia. And from there, my partner at the time was really astute to make me stay in Australia. He said, "You need to go back into your career." And so one thing led to another, and I ended up at Microsoft in the entertainment and devices division. And they essentially created a job for me, which was lovely. And so I worked on all the consumer products that were sold at retail, including Xbox. And so for me, Xbox was one of the most exciting products that they had at the time. Microsoft had been in a bit of the doldrums at that point. And so Xbox was absolutely groundbreaking and connecting people right into the living room, connecting Microsoft right into the living room of people. And so I would say my highlight during that time, and I think we mentioned this in the press release, was I was able to turn around an amazing partnership with Hewlett-Packard and the Oprah Winfrey show when she came down under during that time. And within a few weeks, we had a major integration that was really cost effective and went out to over 150 countries. And also we got to meet Oprah, my whole team, the managing director. It was a lovely, lovely experience. And so after that, I decided that I never aspired to be a long-term Microsoft employee, but it was a fascinating time in my career to be at such a high profile, but not particularly large subsidiary. And so we really led a lot of the Asia Pacific area. And so my boss would often loan me out on other projects just to keep things interesting. So for example, I launched Windows Phone Down Under, which was absolutely another amazing, we did a celebrity tie-in we don't have time for those stories. But anyway, and then after I left Microsoft, I did some consulting, and about 7 years ago, my father got very ill, and I decided it was time to come home. And so I came home, and since then I've been doing a lot of different consulting, getting back in touch with the roots of entrepreneurship, as I said. And ironically, my father was a professor of marketing. And anyway, he passed, and then I'd met Ralph along the way. And then unfortunately, a little over a year ago, I was diagnosed with advanced stage breast cancer. And so on the eve of my double mastectomy and axillary lymph node dissection, I thought I'd just reach out and let Ralph know what was going on, because it was such a shocker. And so that's how we kind of got deeply back in touch. And Ralph was gracious and said, obviously said, get in touch when you're ready to get in touch. And a lot of sort of magic in the last 10 weeks have happened. I was not planning to be working. I was hoping to be celebrating being through cancer by traveling the world, but I only got as far as New Zealand, and I had to turn back. And so that's my 30 years in sort of a nutshell.
Thanks, Katherine. Yeah, that's a very impressive background. So my next question is, how do you see your role here at Volpara?
Well, obviously, I bring to the table something that they haven't had, and that's this very deep connection to consumer marketing, as well as a background in B2B marketing, but also what I've lived in the last year and a half, which is being diagnosed and treated for breast cancer. And I'll be honest, it was not anything I ever had on my radar. I had no idea that you could be diagnosed with breast cancer with no symptoms. I had never felt better in my adult life when I was diagnosed with cancer. And so, I think that this opportunity that I have feels, sort of like the perfect storm, in that I can bring the power of igniting individuals. And when I first talked to Ralph, I was just to do some sort of what I call management consulting. And he and the board came back and said, Katherine, specifically, we want you to focus on women, which I said to Ralph, I said, well, that's brilliant. That's even better than what I pitched to you. And so I spent 10 weeks really studying the business, studying the industry, studying the technology, and how we could potentially shift it to be even more effective, because really it's a complicated market, right? And so what I think I bring is the ability to simplify and make a much more penetrative marketing message, to hopefully shorten the sales cycle, to fill the pipeline, to make it richer, to empower our sales force with more leads, and also to just have a much simpler, cleaner, more penetrating message to change the industry and to really make an impact on the world. So yeah, I'm so excited.
Thanks, Katherine. And we will come back to some of those points that you've touched on. But my next question is for you, actually, Ralph. And that is, what does this new strategic, or this evolved strategic focus on digital marketing mean for your current team?
Yes, so obviously this has been big news for the current team. The team we've had in place in the US in particular over the last few years has done a great job getting us that 27% market share, getting us strong growth, lots of annual recurring revenue and so on. But obviously with Katherine come on, and we've had a strong focus this year on customer acquisition costs and controlling costs and so on. We've let various people go, but we are forever thankful to those people for the strong platform that they've given us to expand upon in this new direction, as Katherine has laid out for us, and that includes then Mark Conager, who was the Chief Commercial Officer. But yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to have Katherine with us now. Her story, her background there is just amazing, and just watching her on some of the team calls earlier and the inspiration she brings to the whole team is just fantastic.
Thanks, Ralph. So Katherine, we'll come back to you. One detail you touched on earlier is that you are also a breast cancer survivor. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a bit more about your experience on that journey, or your experience with breast cancer, and what was perhaps the most surprising aspect of that journey? Yeah.
Well, I'll be honest, there were many surprising aspects, unfortunately, not least of which was my diagnosis, in what I felt was the peak of my health. But perhaps the most interesting would be that I had my first mammogram more than 10 years ago when I was living in Australia. And back then, there was no follow-up. I mean, I literally had to ask and ask and ask, what about my mammogram? And they kind of almost acted like I was being annoying. And that mammography experience was awful as well. They hurt me. And so it was just a horrible first experience. And then I had no follow-up. And finally, when I could get the doctor to respond, she said, "Oh, that's fine. It's nothing to worry about." And so I took that as everything's fine. And I moved forward in life. And I thought that you could palpate breast cancer. I thought that since my mother didn't have breast cancer, I was probably low risk. I had a healthy BMI. I was exercising all the time. I'd never smoked. I barely drank. I thought I was, not a candidate for breast cancer. And then I found out later, and it was quite by an accident, that I ended up having another mammogram, that I did have dense breasts, and no one had told me. And I also didn't know that there was a type of breast cancer that you can't palpate. So even right up until the night before I was about to have my double mastectomy, you could not tell that I had cancer. I had no symptoms. I felt amazing. And so really, for me, there's almost too much information out there that it's hit a level of white noise. It's so hard for women to understand, what should you listen to? What should you pay attention to? There's even, contradictory things. I had asked several times, several other doctors, do I have to worry about having dense breasts? And because I had large breasts, they would always say, "Oh, you probably don't have dense breasts." And so I never had that danger sign that in fact I could be high risk. And so, I would say that, beyond the diagnosis challenge and being able to, participate in your own health, specifically your own breast health as you age. And, I'm a modern woman. I've lived in different countries. I have, changed healthcare systems, as you often do in this career, where we don't work at the same place for 50 years anymore. And so there was really nothing following me in my breast health. And so it was really just a complete inefficiency and a huge disappointment, because then I would later find out that I had a large amount of risk factors, but they're hidden and they're not advertised because they get overshadowed by things like, are you BRCA positive? And that was very, very unfortunate. And then as I continued on in my breast cancer journey, the treatment alone is absolutely mind-boggling. So here you are, you've just been diagnosed with cancer, and you have to suddenly make intense decisions like, will you have a bilateral mastectomy or a single mastectomy? What are the risks of that? What are the benefits of that? And so while you're also in this intensely stressful position, you're also having to make huge decisions for your own treatment. Will you have neoadjuvant chemotherapy or adjuvant chemotherapy? Are you ready for radiation? Will you go immediately into radiation? What about your reconstruction? I mean, it's just mind-boggling, and it's being thrown at you while you're trying to digest this idea that you have breast cancer. So, it's just been, I know a great deal about breast cancer at this point, and so the opportunity to leverage it to Volpara's advantage, I feel very lucky.
Thanks, Katherine. Yeah, that's really important. And of course, it's great to hear that you are healthy now.
Indeed.
So just going back to your background, and you did touch on this earlier, that you are actually one of the few, if not only people, to report to Steve Jobs in a marketing capacity, not just at one of his companies, but all of his companies. So I'm curious to know, what did you learn from Steve, and what was it like to work with him?
Yeah. It's funny, I've only really given myself permission to talk about this now. For years, there's a lot of people who worked for Steve, and I don't know, I never wanted to trade on that, but there's a time to step forward and talk about it. And I believe that time is now, because I can use it to actually help women, avoid breast cancer. And so my experience with Steve was extraordinary in that I joined him probably at the nadir of his failure, right? Next had failed. We were laying off lots of people. We were looking to turn it around. We were having to go into corporate America and sell software, not something he really loved, but we did it anyway. And so, I would say that I learned the power of focus and simplicity. I developed, and I think I already had it, but I managed to continue to hone an appreciation for aesthetic, minimalism, elegance. These were all things that, defined Steve. He did not only drive the people that worked for him hard, but he drove himself hard. He was incredibly dedicated. He was almost, obsessed with things, but in a good way. It's amazing what he achieved. And ironically, a lot of what he achieved was after he was diagnosed with cancer, as you know. But really, he empowered me to think big and to deliver on those big dreams and to work with him and in getting there and to tap my creativity. And I would say that more than anything, the reason our relationship worked, because I worked, as you said, directly for him. And I started fairly young, and he tried many times to bring like a vice president in between us, and they wouldn't last, you know. But I think what our special magic is that I always told him exactly what I thought. I never wavered from my own opinion, and he appreciated that. You know, at times, especially once he got more successful, there were people that often were maybe more leaning towards what they thought he wanted to hear, and I just never leaned that way. You know, I would never want to be a sycophant, and so I think that really made our relationship solid. And I feel blessed that I was able to, you know, stay connected with him all the way through for years. He was a great mentor.
Thanks, Katherine, and it's been fantastic learning a lot about your background on this session.
Thank you.
So just bringing this back to Volpara, what excites you about Volpara and the opportunity ahead?
It doesn't. It all excites me. I mean, you know, as I said, it feels like this amazing opportunity to take my entire career and put it towards saving women from breast cancer. I mean, I'll be honest, I've had, you know, I feel amazing now, and I'm so thankful to be through the intensity of treatment, but I don't want any other women that are unnecessarily, you know, to have their breast cancer unnecessarily missed. You know, I am on a mission to diagnose cancer early if we can, because quite frankly, the statistics are extraordinary. If we could catch women's breast cancer between stage 0 and stage 2, there's almost I believe there's a 90% chance of success over 5 years. But unfortunately, if it drops into stage 3 or stage 4, stage 3, the stats drop, and stage 4, as we all know, is incurable and becomes metastatic. And so for me, it's magic and a huge honor that somehow this has all come together in this crazy time of COVID, where I was, instead of traveling the world, I'm in my living room talking to you today and spending my days and sometimes my evenings figuring out how to make this company more successful. So yeah, it's a gift.
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. And yeah, I think that really aligns well with Volpara's purpose. So thank you very much. So that's all the questions I had. So now I'm going to open the floor up to questions, and we have had a few come in over the last few minutes. So the first one I have here is, when will you see any results from this tweak of strategy?
So excitingly enough, we have some projects already in the works. And as you probably all know, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And I don't want to say anything I shouldn't say, but I will tease that we're going to try really hard to deliver something really compelling that is not just a pink curling iron or a new lipstick line for October, but something that can seriously impact breast cancer and give women that ability to participate in their own breast health. Because another trend that I think is really, you know, in the moment is this idea of getting involved in your own self-care, right? Obviously, with what's going on. Doctors are hard to see. We're all in telemedicine. And so people need to participate in their own health, and we want to give them tools to do that. So October, yeah.
Thanks, Katherine. And so the next question I've got here is relating to digital marketing strategy. So what sort of digital marketing channels do you see opportunity in?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, you know, obviously, in this incredibly convoluted marketplace where there's so many voices and things, I want Volpara to be a clean and elegant and respectful voice to women. I want to talk in an empowered way. I don't want to talk down to women. I want to give them a language that's intelligent, but also cuts right to what's most important. Like I was talking about before, this complexity that's in the industry, not just of your risk factors, for example, but the diagnosis itself. And so obviously we're looking at video. I mean, who wouldn't be looking at video in many different ways, whether it's advertising, whether it's, you know, various other social channels. Video is fantastic. You know, personally, I think that, you know, I always tell Ralph that digital is the beast of modern marketing, because unlike marketing of the past, you can measure it. And if you find something that works, you can pour money into that little crack that works and make it into a huge opportunity. And so we know who we want to go after, and that's a brilliant use of digital marketing. So yeah, I'm excited to use that. And likewise, in this time of, in this time of COVID, we need to give our sales force more tools to connect with creativity and not just emails or phone, but fully used video, demonstrations over video and things like that. So yeah, there are many possibilities.
Excellent.
Sam, I'll just jump in there a bit as well. It's been a joy over the last week in particular. Watching Katherine interact with our sales leadership team, especially in the US. Yeah, we still have these people. Deborah Sanders is now Director of Sales for North America. Dave Metzapre, Steve Mosey, and so on, who've got decades of experience in this industry, sales experience, and seeing that mesh with Katherine's ideas and visions has been really exciting this week.
Great, thanks. So the next question is for Katherine, and also Ralph, you might want to jump in on this one as well. What will be your focus now? Generating public awareness to drive better care, or is your focus more the mammography clinics?
I think it's a combination. I'm using this term two-pronged attack. And so, yes, I think that we need to continue on this amazing path that Volpara has been on for the last 10 years, and they've made great progress. You know, as Ralph said in his intro, you know, we have real customers today using our technology, and not just any customers, but some leading clinics in the United States and globally. And so that's something we're not going to take our foot off the gas. If anything, we're going to continue even harder. And then this other arm is to get women to understand what's important and to get them to participate in their own breast health and understand, you know, how Volpara products can help them, and also provide them the tools so that the whole experience is better. And we have, as you can imagine, many different ideas to try and make the whole mammography experience better for both the clinician as well as the women that will be participating in it. So, you know, the possibilities, you can imagine, they're endless in terms of what we could do there. It's really a matter of prioritizing now as we move forward.
Excellent. So we've got a comment and a question here. Thank you, Katherine, for sharing your breast cancer experience. Am I correct in my understanding that Volpara will pivot to market more towards the consumer or women, and for women to take responsibility for their breast care health? Will you also have a better Volpara breast cancer brand that is targeted more at the women?
Yeah. So I would say, as I said before, it's we're going to keep on with the clinical tools that we have and continue to improve them and simplify them and create this elegant and beautiful breast health platform. But absolutely, the pivot is to also address women. And in doing that, as you can imagine, I've only been on board officially for a few days, but brand is my jam. I love clean branding and elegant, easy to understand marketing. And so that will penetrate eventually all the way through our entire website, whether it's B2B, B2C. As I always joke with the team, I want my mother to be able to understand this. It doesn't matter that you're selling to radiologists. It should be simple, elegant, easy to understand, you know, and that's with respect to radiologists, because obviously, you know, they know their stuff. As far as I'm concerned, eventually a radiologist saved my life by diagnosing my condition, but that doesn't mean that we have to speak in a way that's confusing. And you know, I just think that there's so much opportunity with that to inspire people and to not intimidate them, especially the women, because it can be intimidating if you use that kind of language. So I would prefer to use a very approachable and respectful language.
Thanks, Katherine. So I've got another question here around strategic focus. So can you clarify if this new strategy means a complete step away from traditional marketing, or if there will still be some investment in these activities?
Well, certainly, you know, you can imagine trade shows have taken a bit of a step back in these days of COVID. We've even tried some virtual and online. But, you know, I would say that some of the really traditional marketing, like trade shows and, you know, face-to-face marketing or face-to-face sales where you might have a brochure, all that is obviously being challenged now. And so it's going to force us to really use the digital tools that are available. But, you know, I'm sure Ralph may have mentioned this in the past, but if you look at what's happening now, some companies haven't missed a beat with COVID. And, you know, we were lucky when I first started talking to Ralph, and it's okay, I hope it's okay I mentioned this, Ralph, but since they're in Wellington, it's earthquake country. So they were ready to go. As soon as COVID happened, you know, we're using Microsoft Teams, and we were able to stay in touch and be very productive regardless of where we are and whether we had to stay at home and not be on the road. And so, yeah, I think that we're doing well. Do you want to add anything, Ralph? Sorry.
No, that's an excellent answer, Katherine.
Yep. Thank you. So we are getting close to our finish time. We've got room for a few more questions. So the next one here I've got is, what are your top 3 priorities for the next 12 months?
My top 3 would be to have a strong October and start to, you know, very strategically and carefully enter into the space of addressing women and getting them more involved in their health care. I'm sorry, in their breast health specifically. To get our brand, as we talked about just now, get our branding, whether it's our B2B marketing or our B2C, perhaps a little cleaner and more succinct and easier to understand. And the third thing, you know, really continuing to empower our sales force with modern tools to amp up this digital arm that I mentioned before. And, you know, I think that's something that's going to be hugely important as we move forward. Yeah. Do you want to add anything, Ralph? No, he's muted.
Yeah, no, that was a good summary, Katherine. No, obviously, you know, the year ahead is going to be tricky with COVID, but you know, we've got a good, strong pipeline. And as Katherine has said, you know, we're not stopping selling to radiology clinics. You know, it's full steam ahead on that. And we're going to empower our salespeople, put pressure on the pipeline and so on, using all these digital marketing techniques. I'm looking forward to reporting the results of that as we go forward.
Excellent. So we've got another question here that is looking to clarify this new strategy, and that is, so why is the messaging and the you know, awareness, raising awareness to women in general so important from a sales point of view?
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't your focus be to improve the sales pitch to decision makers inside the clinic?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would think that there's 2 sides of that, right? I think, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but less than 60% of women actually get their mammography. And that's a horrendous statistic. And imagine if, you know, even if we were to increase that by 10%, how many lives would be saved and how much money would be saved, not only in the healthcare system, but from the families that suffer from cancer, right? And so that's one aspect. Can you repeat the question? Because I forgot the other angle. There was a second side.
So it is, shouldn't your focus be to improve the sales pitch?
Yep.
Makers in the clinic.
Right. And so I would say, in addition to unleashing the power and passion of women, something that I've done a great deal of is thought leadership, and to become leaders in this. I mean, obviously, Volpara is incredibly unique in that I believe, and Ralph can correct me on this, we have upwards of 20 PhDs, right? And so to me, I want to unleash that expertise into the field and influence, you know, C-level decision makers with our prowess and our technology. I mean, it's real science-based. And so, as you can imagine, I've done a lot of that in the past, especially with regard to Steve. And, you know, something else that we didn't talk about is this idea of influencer marketing. And you can imagine, think of the breast cancer news that you've heard recently, right? I mean, unfortunately, breast cancer does not discriminate whether you're a celebrity with a lot of money or whether you're the person working down the street at the grocery store. Breast cancer affects everyone. And so one thing we didn't talk about in my background, but I've done a lot of celebrity marketing and influencer marketing. And so if we work in the way that I'm looking at, I think that there's endless possibility to not only get our own message out, but to leverage influencers who care deeply about saving women from cancer. And so do I think that will influence the decision makers at the clinics? 100%, absolutely. They're just one important element of this story. Yeah.
Did you have anything to add to that, Ralph?
No, just to repeat that overall message, Sam, we're very much continuing to sell to the clinics and refine our messaging and return on investment stories for those decision makers. But equally, we're looking forward to that point where women walk in the door and request high quality screening done in a very comfortable, very safe way with accurate breast density measurements.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ralph. Just noting we have gone a little bit over the 30-minute mark that we said we would stick to. So that is, I think we will close it off there. But thank you very much, Katherine. It was great to learn a lot about you and your background, and it sounds like a very exciting pathway ahead for Volpara. So I will now hand back to Ralph, who will close our session.
Well, thanks Sam, and thanks Katherine. Thank you everyone for listening and continuing to support us. I really do believe we're incredibly lucky and excited to have Katherine on board with her expertise and knowledge around marketing and the breast cancer, and we really do look forward to reporting back to the market and investors in these meetings and elsewhere on the journey from here on in. It's going to be an incredibly exciting story over the next year. Thank you.